Hey guys, so today I'm going to be teaching you how to read 50 books in 2024. I used to read a lot as a child, and I stopped in my early teens, and it's a habit that I've just recently picked up again. So I'm going to be using the tips that I implemented into my life to teach you guys how to increase how much you read. As a disclaimer before we get started, I just want to make it clear that it doesn't matter how many books you read, as long as you're reading something. I say 50 because that's the goal that I have for myself this year, but there are so many benefits to reading, and even if you're reading 5 or 10 books a year, that's still better than reading none. So the first step is to get a Kindle. The reason why I've listed this first is because it's the most relevant to me, as I just got a Kindle for Christmas, and it has completely changed the way I approach reading. One of the greatest benefits of having a Kindle is that you have a book with you wherever you go, and it's also waterproof, which means you can use it wherever you are. You can bring it in your backpack, or you can carry it with you, or you can even just have it next to your bed and read whenever you feel like reading. Another great benefit to having a Kindle is that you can have all your books on one device. So I have a bookshelf that has numerous books, but I usually get my books from the library, and having a Kindle means that I don't have to go to the library and find the books that they have there, but instead I can just have all my books on one device, so I know exactly where I need to go when I want to read. Another cool benefit to the Kindle is that it uses an e-ink display, which means that you can turn the brightness off completely and just use natural light to read, which ultimately means that reading at night won't affect your sleep. I used to not use devices before bed because I was concerned about how it would affect my sleep, and so I would only use physical books. But by using a Kindle, I can turn the display off and still read without the damaging effects of light. And lastly, this one's personal to me, but I like to define words that I'm unfamiliar with when I'm reading, and with a Kindle it has a built-in dictionary. So all you do is just hover over the word for a second with your finger, and it will define the word immediately for you. And you can also make notes about words you don't understand, or phrases you liked, quotes that were valuable, stuff like that. And that is difficult to do in a normal book, because if you have to pull out your phone to define a word, it kind of takes away the flow of reading. But with a Kindle, you can just keep going and refer back to that word later. The second bit of advice I'd give is to use your phone as an e-reader. So if you don't have a Kindle, or you just don't carry your Kindle with you wherever you are, you can install the Kindle app or other e-reader apps on your phone and use it as an e-reader. It's actually very convenient because it's a nice size to hold, as you naturally do, and you can also use the volume buttons to go back and forth between pages, which makes it very convenient to read. However, something you need to be cautious about is getting distracted by the other apps on your phone. I intend to release a video soon talking about how to avoid social media addiction, phone addiction, and how to get the best use out of your phone without it taking control of your own life. So keep an eye out for that video. But for now, you can simply turn off notifications or turn on Do Not Disturb mode on your phone while reading. The convenience to this is that you can pull your phone out wherever you are, whether you're waiting in line for something, whether you have downtime before a lecture or a meeting, or even if you're just in bed and you don't want to use your Kindle, you can just pull out your phone and read, and it's very convenient. This leads into the third point, which is to use your downtime efficiently. So with reading, it doesn't have to be an activity that you specifically designate time to doing. You can use any opportunity you're given to read. I personally like to read in small intervals rather than one big session. So especially with books that have relatively small chapters, you can break it up into chapters where you say, okay, I'm going to read this section of this chapter, and then at a later point I'll finish the chapter, especially if it has subsections within the chapters. And so if you're reading on a Kindle or a phone, you can simply pick it up when you're out and about and read a small section and pick up later, instead of having to designate a lot of time towards reading and then not have time for other activities. Additionally, you can use reading as a substitute for social media. So if you were sitting waiting for a meeting to start, you might pull out your phone and go on social media and just scroll or text people that you don't need to be texting purely because you're bored. But if you have reading as a substitute, you're far less likely to need to go and use those apps, and instead you can do something beneficial and productive, and also make use of the downtime so that you're not sitting around waiting. There might be some of you watching this that claim that you don't have time to read, which is why you haven't been doing it. But in reality, like I mentioned before, there's probably a lot of time that you spend doing activities that don't really benefit you. Maybe right now you can open your phone and have a look at your screen time each day and think, oh, maybe I spent an hour today on TikTok, or I spent 2 hours watching YouTube, and instead realize that by reading, you can learn far more than you would have by scrolling on those apps without actually taking information in, when you could instead be reading about a topic that's valuable to you and gaining so much knowledge. Something else worth keeping in mind is that reading can be fun and recreational. You don't have to approach it as something like studying, where you're purely doing it to learn something. You can actually do it as enjoyment, and this makes it far easier to substitute social media because you don't feel like you're giving up your time of relaxation, because instead you're investing it into something beneficial, but it's also fun and it gives you a break from the rest of the things you have to do in your day. In terms of finding things you enjoy reading, my biggest piece of advice here would just be to explore different genres. If you hear a recommendation or see a book that you don't think you will like, it's worth still giving it a go, because you don't have to finish the book, but if you start reading it, you'll learn what you do and don't like. For example, I read a book about the neuroscience of sleep. It's called Why We Sleep, and I found it so interesting. And at first I thought, okay, I don't really have an interest in neuroscience, I'm not sure if I'm gonna like this. But I ended up finishing the book, and now I have a big interest in neuroscience in general, because the book was just so interesting. And so from then on, I can go and look at other neuroscience books and just expand my horizons. Another thing is looking at fiction versus non-fiction. I personally prefer reading non-fiction, but there are some fiction books that I read at certain times. The reason why I read fiction at certain times is because I sometimes struggle to read later on in the day because I get quite tired, and non-fiction books can be very heavy in terms of consumption, especially something like neuroscience, where you're understanding like complex terms and words you've never seen before. So sometimes reading a fiction book is a nice way to take a break from that and kind of just let your imagination flow, which is therefore easier to read. Another piece of advice I'd give is to start slow. So reading is ultimately a marathon, not a sprint, in the sense where it doesn't matter how much you read, it just matters that you're making an effort. So reading is also a skill, and you have to be conscious of that fact, because when you're reading, especially when I first started reading, I would always read maybe even a paragraph at some point, and then my mind would wander and I wouldn't be able to focus, and I'd sit there and I'd think to myself, maybe reading's just not for me. Maybe my attention span is so bad that I just can't do it. But I stuck to it and I kept reading, and you will notice that as time progresses, it becomes easier to focus. You'll be reading and you'll just get lost in the text. You won't be conscious of your surroundings. But when you first start reading, it's so new to you that you have to follow along and develop the skill. So just be conscious of the fact that even if you struggle to focus and you don't enjoy reading at the start, it is something you can develop and you can improve at it. A solution to zoning out is simply just taking a break and coming back. Maybe just give yourself 5 minutes reading and a 5-minute break, or 10 minutes reading, 5-minute break, and just keep increasing the reading time until you build your reading stamina, essentially. Something I kind of touched on earlier is that sleep is actually very important for reading. I struggle to read in the evenings because I'm tired. So instead of staying up reading, I'll usually go to bed earlier and do my reading in the morning instead. If you're not sleeping enough, it's going to be hard to stay focused on what you're reading because your mind will just wander and you might even just start falling asleep while reading. So using reading as a way to fall asleep can be beneficial, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're sleeping enough, or at least reading while you're well rested, so you can actually understand and remember the information that you're reading in the text. The final, and in my opinion, most important thing to increase how much you read is just to enjoy it. Find something you enjoy reading, read about topics that interest you, and don't see it as a chore or studying or something like that, but instead just view it as a recreational activity that you're doing because you enjoy it. Of course, you learn things and you benefit from reading, but ultimately the activity itself should be fun. So if you aren't enjoying it, try new things, try different genres, try different ways of reading, Maybe if you read on devices, you'd rather read a physical book. And maybe if you don't like reading physical books, try reading on a device instead. Maybe it'll change the experience for you. So just try new things, try new methods of reading, and ultimately have fun with it. Thanks for watching the video. I just wanted to let you know that I'm starting a 50 book challenge this year. At the end of every week, I'll be uploading a video reviewing a book that I've read and providing a summary of it. So if you want to expand your reading library and just explore new interests, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that. This way you can see how I'm actually implementing my advice used here to read 50 books in 1 year, and you can follow along with me. I'll be taking book recommendations, but also providing lots of recommendations myself. I'll be covering a large range of genres that interest me, so I'm sure there'll be something that will interest you there, even if you don't like certain genres. The first book I'll be reviewing is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's one of the early self-help books, and I thought it would be a good way to start the year. So stay tuned for that, expect to see that tomorrow, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks for watching.